Welcome to today's short episode of She Has a PhD, the podcast where we celebrate extraordinary women in science. I'm Rita, your host for today. Last week, we heard the story of Dr Minmin Yen, a leader in the biotech world. Today, she's back to have a short conversation on a phenomenon that affects many young female scientists around the world, imposter syndrome. Mimi, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
For those listening who don't know what imposter syndrome is, could you briefly describe this phenomenon?
Sure. So imposter syndrome was introduced more than 40 years ago to explain an internal experience that was highly prevalent among high-achieving women in the workplace who always felt like frauds despite how highly accomplished they were. And it was a term that was really coined in 1978 by psychologists whose research only focused on white middle to upper class women between the ages of 20 and 45, but it's now more of a universal concept that we talk about.
Yeah, because research shows that imposter syndrome is more common amongst women, but also minority groups. So why do you think this happens?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discourse around whether imposter syndrome is an internal or external phenomenon and who that burden really is on. And I think while feeling unconfident and second guessing yourself at work, that feeling is pretty universal, so much so that white men resonate with that term. But the burden has been put on the individual, particularly women, minority groups, and the intersection of the two, women of color. And I think this happens because there's a lot of sexism and racism in the workplace, environments that really dismiss women of color and superficially tell them to uplift and see their own value, but they're constantly dismissed. So of course, we question our worth when we're constantly being told, whether it's consciously or not, we don't matter, through processes or systems that are put in place in the professional environment.
Yeah. On a more personal note, have you ever felt that you had imposter syndrome or any feelings of inadequacy or inferiority?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could say all this and intellectualize the whole discourse, but we're not going to change sexism and racism in the moment when we feel like that. And we might not have the energy at the moment to think like that and fight the system all the time. And we just feel like we're not enough. So I felt that a lot before. And in the absolute moment to see if I could shake it off, I shake my head and I tell myself that those thoughts are just that. They aren't helping right now. It's my mind trying to protect me. So thank you so much, but please exit the room. And that's usually when I'm standing up in front of a meeting or a presentation or anything like that. And I need like a very short-term Band-Aid for how I'm feeling and to keep going. But I think when we have a moment, the most important thing is to be gentle with yourself and process all of those emotions and also then start to think the opposite way. So scientists, I think, myself included, we love a lot of data. So what are the list of accomplishments that you have? And if you don't have one, start one. What are some things that people say? And for myself, to the right of my computer, I actually have a whole wall of cards that students, employees, or like mentors have given me so that sometimes you don't believe yourself when you say these things to yourself, but you believe other people. So if I could have that wall of other people's words encouraging me, I sometimes look to that to be like, okay, maybe you might not believe yourself right now, but other people have believed you and who you say you are and how you act. So just try to take some comfort in that. And that sometimes helps as well.
Wow, that's an amazing idea to champion oneself, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you think as a society we can overcome imposter syndrome, or do you think it can't be overcome at all?
I think we can overcome it. I think it comes back to that. It really is an external thing, but it's not going to happen overnight. So systematic changes in the workplace that people are doing to eradicate biases. There's so much good work that's happening around closing the salary gap so we don't undervalue women's work, promote women and people of color into leadership, and also be just really cognizant of the labor that they do in the workplace, both listed in their job description, but also a lot of the labor that is not listed in the job description, but ascribed to them because that's just like the work that we think that women and people of color should be doing. There's a lot more work that we're doing in the workplace, but we're being paid much less. And then for us, I think internally, it's also about setting boundaries. So taking back ownership of our space, our voice, our worth in the workplace, and learning how to stick to that, I think, is the hard part. I think in our moments of resentment, we're like, oh, I'm going to tell this person that, and I'm set this boundary here. But then that person keeps coming back, or that system keeps coming back. And that's when it's really hard sometimes to maintain that boundary. And I think that's where we have to do a lot of work there to maintain that boundary, but also the systems themselves need to be changing and the processes themselves need to be changing as well. So again, a two-way street, really.
Collective effort. Yeah. But what is the biggest advice you would give someone, a young scientist especially, to try and overcome imposter syndrome? You've mentioned about champion oneself and trying to set boundaries. Would you say those were the most important to sort of overcome imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, for scientists, it comes back to the data.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to develop that self-awareness, right? Know who you are, what you're worth, and also telling ourselves that we're enough. I think we constantly feel like if we do this, then we're enough, or if we do this, then we're enough. And we're always moving the goalpost further and further along. So we're never going to feel enough if we're like, oh, let me just do this. Let me just do that.
Yeah.
I think, yes, it's the self-awareness of knowing that everyone, including ourselves, has things to improve. It does not make us less than. So when we're doing that to ourselves, when we're having those thoughts, write those thoughts out. For every thought that you say, oh God, I'm really bad at this, or I really need to improve that, point out another thing that you're really good at and that you really should give yourself a lot of credit for, and see ultimately that list, how does that balance out? You can even start to think about things that you do want to improve and trust in yourself and know that you have the capacity to improve, and that itself is enough. And then eventually that gets moved to something that you're really strong at. And I think it's more than we give ourselves credit for. And for me, I like to keep that list accessible so that I can also see, okay, yeah, when I first started out, I really didn't know how to manage a team. I didn't know how to hire. I didn't know how to do these things. But I trusted in myself to learn and to be able to get through it. And now those are things that I know how to do. So even that process, I think, is really important to make sure we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, fantastic. It puts things into perspective, isn't it? Because sometimes you forget how many things you've achieved until you kind of have to remind yourself of all of the things you've come through. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mimi.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. Make sure to check out last week's episode to hear more about Dr. Minmin Yen and her career path. She has a PhD, will be back soon. But until then, stay curious and we'll see you soon.